will record this workshop, and it will be later available on the ECPS YouTube channel. So welcome everyone to the second session of the ECPS virtual workshop series entitled We the People and the Future of Democracy, Interdisciplinary Approaches. This online series follows our in-person conference, which was held at Oxford University between the 1st and 3rd of July and continues the vital discussion initiated there. My name is Réka Koleszár. I'm a PhD student at the National Political Science University in Taiwan, and I'm currently interning with ECPS. ECPS curates this virtual workshop series to address one of the most pressing questions of our time: how the idea of the people shapes the fate of democracy. By examining how the people can serve both as a democratic force and a tool of authoritarian consolidation, this series fosters interdisciplinary dialogue to better understand democratic backsliding, resilience, and the future of democracy worldwide. Today, we will have our second session of this series, which will examine Poland under the title of The Nation or Just an Accidental Society: Identity, Polarization, Rule of Law, and Human Rights in 1989 and 2025 Poland. As part of our commitment to sharing knowledge, we will be putting together a workshop report and also making the video recording of this event available on our website and YouTube channel. These resources are meant to be a lasting reference not just for scholars and policymakers, but also for anyone interested in understanding the pressing challenges that populist and authoritarian politics pose to global democracy today. In the ongoing journey of our workshop series, we extend our gratitude to all the scholars and experts who contribute their extensive insights. With this, I will introduce our esteemed moderator and distinguished panelists for today's discussion. Today's workshop is going to be chaired by Mavis Maclean, who is a Senior Research Fellow of St. Hilda College, University of Oxford, and a Research Associate at the Department of Social Policy and Intervention. She has carried out socio-legal research in Oxford since 1974 and was a founding director of the Oxford Centre for Family Law and Policy. Our first presenter today will be Dr. Joanna Kurczewska, who will discuss the paper entitled The Concept of Nation: Civil and National Solidarity's Resistance to the Communist Rule and its Evolution After the 1989 Breakthrough. Dr. Kurczewska is a full professor in the humanities and head of the Sociology and Anthropology of Culture team at the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology of the Polish Academy of Sciences. Our second presenter today will be Dr. Kamil Jonski, presenting on the topic Impact of Political Polarization on Key Liberal Democratic Institutions: Parliamentary Lawmaking Process, Presidency, and the Constitutional Court. Dr. Jonski is an economist who graduated from the SGH Warsaw School of Economics, where he is currently an assistant at the College of Economics and Social Sciences. Our third presentation today will be delivered by Dr. Małgorzata Fusára on protection of human rights and its implications for women's and minority rights. Dr. Fusára is a full professor of humanities in sociology at the Institute of Applied Social Sciences, University of Warsaw. She co-founded Poland's first gender studies program at the Institute and served as the Polish government's plenipotentiary for equal treatment between 2014 and 2015. Our fourth presenter will be Dr. Jacek Kurczewski on the topic of the sociological dimensions of the rule of law: democratic transition, post-2015 backsliding, and post-2023 restoration. Dr. Kurczewski is a full professor of humanities in the field of sociology and a lecturer in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology of Customs and Law at the University of Warsaw. He currently serves as editor-in-chief of Societas Comunitas and specializes in the sociology and anthropology of law and customs. So following the presentations, we will have a discussion during which each of our discussant will provide feedback for about 7 minutes. Today we have with us three wonderful discussants: Magdalena Solska, Barry Sullivan, and Krzysztof Motyka. Magdalena Solska is an assistant professor of political science at the University of Freiburg. She currently directs the research project Political Opposition in Post-Communist Democracies and Authoritarianism, funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation. Her research focuses on political systems after communism and specifically on forms, strategies, and institutionalization of opposition in selected countries in Central and Eastern Europe. Barry Sullivan is the Raymond and Mary Simon Chair in Constitutional Law and the George Anstapalu Professor of Constitutional Law and History. Before joining the Loyola faculty, Professor Sullivan had a varied career in the private sector of law, government legal practice, the teaching of law and public policy, and university administration. And last but not least, Christoph Matika is a legal philosopher and sociologist of law, chair of human rights and social work at the Second John Paul Catholic University of Dublin. He is currently the editor of the KUL Research Bulletin, and organizer of the annual Human Rights Days conference. As a reminder, we will have a Q&A session after the presentations and the discussion. So participants can write their questions and comments in the chat or pose their questions by raising their virtual hand. And now I would like to invite Mavis Maclean to provide an overview of the workshop subject matter and lead us through the session. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I have recovered my voice. Thank you, Reka, that was very helpful. And I do apologize for my problems in understanding you. The sound is difficult. But it is exciting to be here, and I think this is an extraordinarily important topic, which is only just beginning to be discussed. I had a message from my friend Jacek Kurczewski recently asking, who is this Tommy Robinson in London? Well, good question. Tommy Robinson is leading a far-right group, which is reflecting the general anxiety about immigration, about even our prime minister said that this was becoming an island of strangers. But focusing on immigration is this huge surge in populism, in mass movements, and we are very unprepared for this, and would very much like to hear discussion on how to prepare for this. In a sense, we are a mirror image of your situation when you began your recovery from a long period of oppression, when you have had, Lech Wałęsa leading exciting group healings. And I think there's a question to be asked about, is it that we wish to have popular movements, that they really reflect what people feel and care about, or are we very afraid of them because there is no way to plan what kind of issue will be popular? For you, it was a very positive movement. For us, it is now a very frightening movement, with involving violence, involving hatred, and we are very ill-equipped to deal with it. Our political parties have collapsed. We have only the Labour Party, which everybody criticizes. The Conservative Traditional Party has gone, and this new image, this ghost is appearing in the distance. Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, which is colloquially known as to the right of Genghis Khan. So I look forward very much to the papers today. I think we're talking about something important, and I hope to learn some solutions. You taught me how to understand the rule of law when we began to have problems with that. Thank you, Christoph. And now I hope you can help us understand better the surge of populism. So we have our presenters, Joanna Kurczewski, we have Kamil Jonski, we have Małgorzata Fujara, and we have Jacek Kurczewski. I'm very sorry to have to let you know that I'm afraid Joanna is not well. She's unable to present her paper in person, but Marriage is a wonderful institution. Here is Jacek ready to help her and help all of us by presenting her paper for us. So I won't say any more than that. And I do hope I managed to understand what's going on a bit better and avoid doing the wrong thing. Just if I become a nuisance, just switch me off. I won't be offended. But so far so good. I could hear Reka very well, so we're making progress. So I think our next task is to invite Jacek to help us by sharing Joanna's thoughts with us. Jacek, you are mute.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy that I'm able to take part in the seminar, which I'm thankful to the center for allowing us to discuss the issue of rule of law in context of populism, whatever populism is, and whatever the term means, which for me, and I think not only for me, is not always clear, though I know that there are at least some people who are called populists whom I'm very much afraid of. Well, and I should also add that I'm very thankful to my younger colleague, Kamil Jonski, who humbly is just on the list, but who in fact is convener of this seminar, and it is all his idea. Well, I'm sorry, Joanna could not join us. Well, I have pages and I have a watch. So I know, and you know, this is difficult to do the job of I should resume at least, well, her notes and part. Well, in fact, she was, she considered her task is to speak well of the way in Polish recent history of political ideas, the concept of the people, political concept of the people and nation is used and understand. Well, so it looks like, well, the words like concept words like nationalism or patriotism, well, means the same in all languages. Well, technically you can, of course, with Google especially, translate easily, but well, in fact, meaning is different. Well, in the local context, well, I know very well what Dr. Johnson said of patriots and how well, better I will not say so, but at least for Poles, patriotism is something which is good in contrast to nationalism, which is a bit suspect, while in English, nationalism is a very technical term, which for us, has this negative, often very negative connotations. So why it is difficult to transfer? Well, Joanna's studies remain within the Polish context. So when she's studying, well, she needs to, this issue, she needs to use the term both patriotism and more often than nationalism, because only some kinds of patriotism are in Polish, properly academic Polish nationalistic, though on the other hand, well, narodowy, meaning national, is something, well, acceptable and good. Well, if the point of reference here is the study which Professor Kurczewska made in 1990s on Polish politicians when Poland, the new republic, so-called third Polish republic, just emerged from the communist times, and well, she made a study of interviews with her collaborators of 53 politicians, well, being MPs in those first parliaments, as well as with some fringe out of parliament politicians belonging to the so-called, and that's what is called nationalist, fringe those days. And this one of her conclusion was that in the 90s, and surprisingly, very soon after, well, the Wałęsa, our chairperson mentioned, well, became president, and he lost next elections to the post-communist president, and it was a strange situation. Well, it was considered there is a danger of return of the communism in the disguise of the so-called social democracy, post-communist social democracy. And that was the people, our friends from the West, were asking us why it happened so. Well, and when Joanna interviewed Polish politicians, she discovered that whether those from the former Communist Party or those from Solidarity movement, and almost all non-communist politicians were some this way or another linked to the Solidarity movement, well, they would nevertheless were skeptical. In the interviews, they very rarely referred to the solidarity as a political idea, as a source of solidarity, of repertoire of political ideas for the new republic. It looked like solidarity, this solidarity of 1980, 1989 was considered to be, think of the past, glorious, but not too, not worth of of the reworking, let's say. Well, which it's today, when after, as Joanna points in her notes, today when we look from the perspective of Poland, Polish society is so sharply divided into another conflict, this time not post-communist against former anti-communist opposition, but what is considered the division into peace, meaning not peace, but quite warring law and justice party under the leadership of Kaczynski, well, and the Central Liberal Democratic Party, let's say, which is called, well, it changes its names. Let's call it the Civic Coalition. So this perhaps it's time to recall, what was the real, political and civic combination that provided for the strengths of solidarity movement. So solidarity, as it emerged from the Interfactory Strike Committee set up in summer of 1980, had been markedly pluralistic as to the ideological affiliation of its participants. There had been a common platform personified in the charismatic young skilled worker with macho mustache and Polish black Madonna in the lapel of his simple jacket, accompanied by shipyard engineers and Warsaw dissident intellectuals, whom he turned into expert advisors. Well, the analysis of the solidarity movement is usually made at the official level. But in order to understand better its complex nature, which is often mostly forgotten today, well, Joanna advises us to look into the specific legacy of solidarity that had been creation of Father Popiełuszko, the Roman Catholic priest who was abducted and killed by the agents of Communist Ministry of Internal Affairs in the transitional time. Well, in October 1984, just in the middle of so-called, half partly defrozen worst, emergency rule of Communist Party. Well, just for those who are not familiar, the undercover officers stopped the priest's car, asking for help, and beat him to death, threw the body in a weighted sack into Vistula River. Body was discovered the next day. The national and international uproar started. 100,000 people gathered at funeral. The criminal trial by Communist Ministry of Justice, in a sense, was opened against the perpetrators, and well, there was a proper trial, let's say, fair trial, but the murder was during the trial was presented as a private initiative of ministries, officials, and officers. Well, Pavel Popiełuszko was killed not just for nothing. He was killed. It was considered as a reaction towards the masses for the homeland. And Joanna is pointing to the need of anthropology or social research of the facts like cultural products, like the masses for the homeland. These masses were a sacred act in theological sense, but also social acts of patriotic significance. Well, Popiełuszko was accused of politicization of the liturgy, of his homilies, in which he was appealing for the need to be resistant against, but peacefully resistant against the surrounding. He was criticized not only, he was attacked by the communist agitators, but also was criticized by many priests who were considering it, going too far into the politics. But Popiełuszko emphasized that patriotism could be a path to conversion. But I think, I'm quoting Joanna, the Protestant barrister Edward Wende, who was friend of Father Popiełuszko, said that, and it is convincing, said that Popiełuszko never issued political commands to his faithful, but communists could not understand this. He spoke the truth that was uncomfortable for them, but he always proclaimed it in the context of gospel. There's masses for homeland where complex, cultural, products, outstanding artists, some even non-believers at all, some very far from not practicing normally. From various political options were contributing to these services. through recitations and decorations. At the same time, you know, the Father Popiełuszko created the link with nearby steelworks, Warsaw Steelworks. All this, recreated in some smaller way, let's say, the sociological phenomenon of solidarity movement as national alliance of workers and intelligentsia transcending, despite the Catholic and religious form, differences in approach to faith. It should also be noted that though masses for the homeland were part of the anti-communist resistance, they had an inclusive message, like the whole solidarity, and agonistic but not antagonistic communication. And so, one of the researchers of these works of Father Popiełuszko, priest himself, Father Burgoński, points to the democratic liberal aspect, the national aspect, which of course was using, all Polish romantic and republican heritage, well, among the values, truth, goodness, justice, love, solidarity, fidelity to ideals, courage, selflessness, useful, peaceful means in resolving conflicts. But they were all taken from well, the ethos of romanticism and Polish romanticism and republicanism. But what is important, that as for Joanna and for me as well, is that patriotism presented by Father Popiełuszko, who was later considered martyr by and not put to the position of the blessed Father Popiełuszko. There is one element that is outside the repertoire of distinctly Polish tradition. In his sermons, he asserts that national community should guarantee the autonomy of the individual and human rights. This liberal patriotism demonstrates that Father Popiełuszko was able to creatively approach the definition of what patriotism means in the era of communism, and this liberal national patriotism, well, it's exactly what I think we need. Even today, that what Joanna says, well, then just to make running in quickly, her study of Polish politicians points to the fact and that though in 90s there was the politics of inclusion was prevalent, and the inclusion of helped post-communist social democracy, so-called social democracy, to win the elections because they adapted themselves to the by reference to the all national Polish tradition, let's say, though with some specific differences. And, exclusive radical nationalists or racists, who, as often is said, they are called, were kept on the fringe. Well, today, in a sense, we witness something different. The process is different because the people who are not necessarily the people, but politicians from the fringe enter the Europe, from Polish fringe enter the European Parliament. I will not name the gentleman who is, by the way, neighbor on my street, well, who is notorious for his anti-Semitic and not only negationism, and who won quite well important number of votes, in contrast to the left, which is losing, and is very low in the public opinion polls. And to really last sentence is that Joanna ends her paper with referring to the notion of what she calls it enigmatic representation, telling that what was peculiar for the 90s, that politicians, whether from left or from Solidarity, from a previous opposition, were always, mostly talking as representing the nation or the whole society. They never really were interested what this society has to say to them. In fact, they considered the society as something to be used for their political purpose and to impose their vision. And the question is, if it's this, if not this enigmatic representation has not frustrated Polish society too much in a sense. So instead, today the parties, like even deliberately trying to use the exclusive language like peace, have problems in getting full control of the electorate, which is looking for the new forms of what perhaps some would call populism or right populism, which is very complex and very differentiated internally, including libertarian and not on, but also anti-European elements and xenophobic, anti-migration, etc. This is what, and they are most popular among the younger generation in Poland. Thank you. Sorry.
Professor Maclean, unmute, please.
Thank you. Sorry, I could not unmute until permission was given. Thank you very much, Jacek. And will you give our very warm thanks to Joanna for her extremely interesting contribution. I will treasure this phrase, liberal patriotism, something which we need to learn about very fast if we're not going to be in a lot of trouble. So bless you, Joanna. Hope you're better soon. And thank you, Jacek, very much for helping us in this way. I think with the plan is not to stop for questions now, to save them for later, but to move on through our agenda. And you will see, if you have what I have, that we now turn to Kamil Jonski to talk to us about single text clashing meanings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great honor and pleasure to be a part of this event, and now I hope to say you something useful about what happened with the Polish constitution and with Polish constitutionalism over what was called a Polish constitutional crisis. So just to begin with some stylist facts about Polish political polarization, we should basically distinguish two periods. The first one is the 10 years after the democratic transition, we can call it a transition period, when the political landscape is dominated by what was defined as the post-communist cleavage. So we have former communists, which are marked red, and former dissidents marked black and gray. However, I think for our purpose, the more appropriate framework than just the post-communist cleavage would be the triangle proposed by our co-panelist Jacek Kurczewski, who proposed to distinguish among former dissidents the liberal center and the Christian right. However, this division reached its limit after 10 years since the democratic transition, and in 2001, two brand new political vehicles emerged, founded by the younger generation of the anti-communists. One of them is Civic Platform of Donald Tusk, and the second one is Law and Justice, Peace of Kaczynski brothers. And so, as you can see, since 2005, so 20 years, those two parties basically organize the political life in the country, and actually the conflict is organizing what we are dealing now with the Polish constitution. Okay. So now, from the constitutional point of view, I would be interested with just 2 points on this political history. And the first one is the 1997, when the Polish current constitution had been enacted. And it was quite peculiar event because first, we have quite unusual post-communist majority in the parliament that was actually product of the electoral reform. So as you can see on the chart, the black bar for the Christian right is much bigger than the red bar for the post-communists. Nevertheless, the post-communists formed the simple majority in the parliament, and they coined the constitutional coalition with this liberal center. So part of the former dissidents with the firm opposition of Christian right that instead offered alternative view of the constitution and so-called citizens' draft, which was promptly rejected by the parliament. And the draft of the constitution proposed by the parliament had been subject of the referendum when relatively small majority of 53.5% under the turnaround of 43% accepted the constitution. So the bottom line is that less than 1/4 of eligible voters actually backed this constitution. And that was the beginning of the dark legend of this constitution. So first of all, it was passed by non-representative parliament, so with artificial post-communist majority. And the second one, they were accepted with the very shaky result of the referendum. So it was advocated that the constitution was not the constitution of the majority of people. It was constitution of the minority of people, it was told, and the minority that was predominantly red. However, the constitution worked quite well for nearly 20 years until we get 2015, what was called Polish constitutional crisis, or in a very nice phrase of Judge Mirosław Wyrzykowski, the war against the constitution. And that was possible because Law and Justice enjoyed first, since the democratization, single-party majority. Earlier on, the Polish cabinets were always coalitions. Now they have simple majority, now they have their own president, so they can embark attempts to change the constitution by the simple law. And since 2015, we're actually in 10 years of constitutional quagmire with growing rule of law crisis, growing problems, and after the elections of 2023 that actually Civic Platform formed a government, there is the discussion about restoring or destroying the rule of law, and the rule of law is a very important topic in the Polish political debate. So let me show you just 2 graphs which plots the results of the constitutional referendum back in 1997 and the most recent presidential election, so the runoff of the presidential elections in 2025. The data had been collected among 370 NUTS 4 units of them 66 urban and over 300 rural, and they depict the percentage of eligible voters that either back the constitution in the 1997 or vote one of those two candidates. Again, it's the percentage of eligible voters because in the constitutional referendum in 1997, the boycott was a substantial part. So actually those are people who backed the constitution. And as you can see, after 28 years, 1.5 of the generation, after the democratic transition, tremendous economic growth, European Union accession, migration abroad, migration to the cities, proliferation of higher education, shift of the political landscape, nearly 45% of the variance in the votes for the liberal and anti-liberal candidate can be explained by the percentage of the vote for the constitution 28 years ago. So I think we should be very, very careful with interpreting to match out of this spatial correlation out of the electoral data in the territorial units. But nevertheless, I think it shows that the current discussion about obeying or disobeying constitution has some link to the conflict about the very adoption of this constitution nearly 30 years ago. And so to dig a little bit deeper, I will share with you a few data dig up from the surveys carried out by CBOS on the representative samples of Polish populations. There were around 1,000 people surveyed in each of those surveys. So some sort of survey archaeology. And let me start with the survey carried out shortly after the referendum, June 1997. People were asked how they voted. And as the political landscape turned very substantially from this post-communist cleavage to the current situation, I propose another split. I propose 8 groups created using 2 variables. The first variable is self-placement on the left-right scale. So we have self-identified leftists, centrists, rightists, and substantial fraction of people who cannot self-identify on this spectrum. So let's call them non-engaged. And the second dimension is the attendance in the religious services, which means Roman Catholic in Poland. And I would like to really stress at this very point, I'm not talking about the theology. I'm not asking what position is really Christian, what does it mean to be real Christian, what Jesus would vote if he lived among us today. I'm just talking about a group of people that feel connection to the institution of Roman Catholic Church in the particular time, in the particular place. So people who attend religious services weekly or more frequently were coded as practicing, and people who do it rarely or never are coded as non-practicing. So that's how these 8 groups were created. And as you can see on the left-hand side chart, in 1997, the resistance from the constitution was heavily concentrated among the practicing rights. Those were the people who rejected the constitution, and actually it is pretty consistent with what we know from the history of the debate about Polish constitution. 20 years later, when CBOS asked people who were eligible to vote 20 years ago how they had voted, nearly no one admits being against the constitution. So either it is very high recall bias, or it is some sort of legitimization. Just people learn how to live with the constitution, and there is no contemporary identity built upon the resistance to the constitution. So we don't have situation like in American South when Confederate is still fighting after 150 years. There is no lasting identity built upon the resistance to the constitution. In that sense, the constitution is legitimized. But in the very same survey, 20 years after the adoption of the constitution, CBOS asked also whether there is a need to amend the constitution. And as you can see, again, it is practicing right that most frequently, actually the majority of practicing right, see the need to amend the constitution. So they are not preaching their opposition years ago, but they see that something is not satisfying with this constitution. And let me show you another survey from 2016, which was the very height of the war against the constitution. And CBOS asked wonderful, very simple question. Which side you prefer? Are you with the Constitutional Court, or are you with the right-wing politicians of law and justice that are trying to pack this court? And perhaps surprisingly, and perhaps not, the support for politicians trying to pack the Constitutional Tribunal is again concentrated among those on practicing right. So what can be the interpretation? If they accepted the Constitution as a normative fact, as a text, but they still see the need to amend it, they could get the idea that lacking the political capacity to amend the Constitution, which is very difficult in Poland, one can change meaning of the Constitution by imposing specific interpretation. And the Constitutional Tribunal is the very institution that has the power to impose the interpretation. And as we have a few minutes, let me show the very interesting example of what I call the purposeful top-down delegitimization of the tribunal, and what Hanna Dębska described in terms of sacralization and profanation of this institution, some sort of deconstruction of the myths created by the lawyers. At the very beginning of the crisis, I have the last reading, which is from September 2015. In all 8 groups, the Constitutional Tribunal enjoyed majority of positive opinions. And negative opinions were quite rare. What happened a few months later, when the war against the Constitution escalated and the vast propaganda of the right-wing law and justice portrayed the tribunal as an enemy of the people, you can see the proportions reverted, and the most visible reversion was again among those on practicing right. And the very interesting thing is that before the war against the Constitution, Polish Constitutional Tribunal was actually seen as pursuing a line that was very accommodative to the Roman Catholicism and to the Church as an institution. We had verdicts on the abortion that I'm sure Professor Fushara will describe in great detail. We have verdicts about what was effectively a blasphemy law. We have so-called the objection of conscience. And even on the personal level, the president of the Constitutional Court was awarded by Pope Francis with the Cross of Pro Ecclesia et Pontifice. Never mind, if right-wing politician explained to his practicing right-wing voter that from now the tribunal is the enemy of the people, the result you can see very quickly. And just a few months ago, a few months later, when the packing of the Constitutional Tribunal was finished, and the tribunal was effectively controlled by the nominees of the right-wing law and justice, so now it became the defender of the people, you can see that among the practicing right, the positive opinions outweighed the negative opinions, and again, that was almost perhaps the only group with a clear majority of approval of this brand new Constitutional Court. But again, that's the story about the propaganda. That's the story about the purposeful top-down delegitimization, re-legitimization of the tribunal. But let's give them 5 years so they could observe how this new tribunal is working. So they can see another abortion verdict. They can see the verdicts on the Treaty on the European Union, on the European Convention of the Human Rights, of what Wojciech Sadurski defined as tribunal as governmental enabler. The group of practicing right in March 2022 is still satisfied with the performance of the Constitutional Court. So what are the takeaways from that? First, a current debate over the breaking, the obeying, disobeying of Polish constitution, I will argue, is linked to the very conflict on the adoption of this constitution. And that 28 years after that, the vote, the stance at that debate still explains the political outcomes in contemporary Poland. The constitutional text had been accepted. No one is now preaching that he was against the constitution and he was right. The text is accepted, but the meaning is contested, and is primarily contested by those identifying themselves as religious right. They see the need to amend the constitution, lacking the capacity to amend it. They try to change their meaning by capturing constitutional tribunal, and seeing how this captured tribunal is behaving now, they are satisfied with that behavior. And so there are contemporary legal doctrines that enable that. On the left, you can see Dworkin's moral reading of the Constitution. On the right wing, you can see the so-called common good constitutionalism in the American literature. So the single text can be saturated by conflicting values. So both left and right can cherish the same normative act, the same constitution, but putting completely different idea of rights, of what is constitutional and what is not constitutional. And to make things worse, since 2016 in Poland, they not only enjoy parallel interpretation of the constitution, they enjoy two parallel sets of institutions, of legal institutions that are applying this constitution. So you have right-wing control tribunal, you have packed courts, you have liberal parliament and conservative president. So each side has its own favorite institutions and its own view of the constitution. And what is the result is the constitutional quagmire and the rule of law crisis that will be reviewed in the subsequent presentations. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. I love this idea of two parallel interpretations being morphed into existence. It sounds like a very sensible way of getting through the day without serious battles of any kind. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. Well, now we move on to Margareta, please. Margareta Fujara.
Yes, thank you very much, Mavis. Thank you, organizer.
Women, all yours, Margareta.
Thank you to organizers to inviting to this very interesting session. And the topic is protection of human rights and its implication for women's and minority rights. And I have to begin with notice that I would like to divide my speech into two parts. The first part is devoted to, let's say, general universal human rights. And because we are discussing, as Mavis said at the beginning of our meeting, that we are in a time where our right-wing politicians are attacking some principles, some rights, we should go back to the past and, let's say, to describe very shortly how it was in the past and what I hope never will be future, but we should remember about history to take into consideration some possible attacks. We should remember that during the half of century, it means from the beginning of Second World War up to 1989, in Poland, there was no such fundamental rights like right to freedom of speech, the right to establish associations and unions, including trade unions, the right to demonstrate and manifest, and the right to move free abroad. Freedom of trade unions was one of the demands of the strikes in 1980s, but we have to wait up to 1989 for this freedom, along other human rights to be implemented. And after the change in 89, it was, let's say, general agreement that it was completely not divisive issue that we have to accept this fundamental human rights. Today, this is hard to believe that even if it was our personal experience that before 89, such documents as notings of meeting of scientific society have to be approved by censor, that every gathering which gather more than 5 people have to have permission from authorities, that we have no passports, and to every trip abroad, we have to ask authorities for permission. I'm saying about it just to show how authoritarian regime could put any kind of restrictions to the people, to the society, and we had to fight for all these freedoms. And all of them were more or less ensured in 1989. As I said, there was a general, let's say, general agreement that we have to do it in principle and in practice. With Jacek, we had a wonderful experience with 2 other professors of law to write the first draft of legal regulation of assemblies with freedom of assemblies, and it was passed through parliament. It is one of the examples that all these, let's say, proposals for accepting this general human rights legal regulations were obvious for everybody, that we have to accept it. And even if this first parliament, as Kamil shows us just in the previous presentation, constituted from post-communists, from the right-wing opposition, more, let's say, liberal oppositions, but it was completely not divisive issue. The other story is that, and when we are talking about all this time, it is a long time since 1989, there was not the very, let's say, serious effort to restrict on any of this right. The problem could be the practice, because some of the parties tried to, let's say, capture, for example, television or other media to promote only their point of view. And of course, if you damage the way how we try to ensure that such institutions should be independent from the political influence, there is, of course, the debatable if this is really the full freedom of expression right introduced into reality. Then this is, of course, some kind of divisive issue between the old government, former government in Poland, and government which we have today. But generally, I can repeat that this is not, it was not divisive issues, the principle of human rights, general human rights. But the situation is different when it comes to women's rights and minority rights. And we should remember that during communist times, some kinds of women's rights, like right to reproductive rights, right to abortion, etc. It was something which was accepted since a long time, since 1956, much earlier than in the West. Then generations of women were just accustomed to have such rights. Then it was a very big surprise for them. Then the first, I think very first proposal submitted to the Polish parliament, it was a proposal to restrict right to abortion. And the first proposal was especially hard because it was total proposal of total ban of abortion. And this is the kind of right of women which is divisive and debated all the time since 1989. I can remind that in 1989, Solidarność was fan of abortion, but the women's branch of Solidarność was against this restriction of abortion. Then it could illustrate how divisive issue it was, even in this, let's say, opposition, former opposition during the communist time. And as Kamil mentioned, this problem of right to full right to the body and reproductive rights of women is all the time very vivid and very divisive issue, and led many, mainly women, but with men as well, to the street demonstration all over Poland when it was a special at the beginning when they changed it, and later when they introduced the changes by a constitutional tribunal. It was mentioned by Kamil as well. And it influenced the way how especially young women voted in the last election. Because even if there was huge demonstrations all over Poland, the restrictions are still in our legal system, and it is very hard, and the topic which is not, let's say, finished as a topic to devise society. The other let's say that when we are talking about minority rights as well, it was easier with, let's say, ethnic minorities and national minorities rights. This kind of rights are regulated in a way which is in accordance to EU regulations, and there are even some provisions in our electoral rights which help some people from minority rights to be elected to the parliament. Then this is not such a divisive issue. Of course, there is divisive, which minority could be in the list of national minority, etc. But this is details which always in democracy will be present. But again, going to the worst example, the not so good example as national minority, we should go to the problem of LGBT people and the problem of introduction of marriage equality. We failed many times, not only the marriage equality, but even Civil Partnership Act. And again, this is the issue which is very divisive, and it's very difficult, even if now there is some attempt to introduce something, but there was, I can say that it was an attempt years ago, more than 10 years ago, when I was plenipotentiary for equality. We tried to introduce and it failed. Then there is a not very big, hope that we can achieve it. Then we can say that this general protection rights, as I said, are more or less accepted as a principle. It doesn't mean that politicians did not try to make some restrictions in reality. For example, we all remember in Poland when there was a street demonstration by women in Warsaw after these restrictions put it by constitutional tribunal. At the beginning, everybody was sympathetic, but suddenly there was a kind of information sent to police, and police begin to be very strict and sometimes even very cruel. against women who take part in these demonstrations. And we hope that now there will be some cases in courts against this policeman who did it. But as far as now, we are still waiting. To be more, let's say, to send some more optimism in the end of this story of women's rights, I should remember that we accepted Istanbul Resolution, and according to it, for example, last month we introduced the different. We changed the definition of rape in Poland. And I think that this is very significant because it's the first time we can show that what is usually by feminist jurisprudence underlined as a very important fact is that the woman point of view, the first time is, let's say, included in such important definition. And the more optimistic this is the quota system. In 2011, we introduced quota system into electoral lists, and we are the only country apart of former Yugoslavia who introduced such a system. And now we have a little over 30% of women in parliament, which is very low, but much better than before and better in many other countries, former communist countries. As an example, I can give Hungary, for example, where they have 15, women constituted 15% of the parliament. Then there is the problem of framing these rights is that before 89, it was one of the principles, gender equality was one of the principles. Nobody put question that it should be principle, but nobody accept, I think, this quite old idea that women's rights are human rights. We probably, some of us, especially older generation in this room, remember that it was a slogan which was formed in Vienna conference 2 years before the UN conference, 1995 in Beijing. Then it took us so many years to achieve some of the standards from this platform as 30, for example, 30% in parliament. And I'm afraid that in the consciousness, especially in the consciousness of the politicians, and we have many examples of this, that this framing women's rights as human rights is still before us, unfortunately. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my dear, very much. Big question is, are women human? We're having a big case at the moment with same-sex couples and parents, with the difference between biological parenting and legal parenting. One case, the couple had actually same-sex marriage, they're divorced, disputing the custody of this child. And the whole case depended on whether the woman who had received insemination in order to produce the child had done so in a clinical procedure, or whether she just had sex with this man, and that would determine in law which way the child went after. So it's all this, and then the transgender groups. There's a whole lot of work to be done in that area. Thank you so much for starting the discussion. Anyway, sorry, we're running a little over. So forgive me, and I hope we'll now move on to Jacek Kurczewski, being Jacek Kurczewski this time, not Joanna Kurczewski.
Oh, well, I will try to present my case. Well, the thing I thought I would be able to raise, which is a kind of mental link between the problem of, well, that interests our hosts, namely the populism and the formula "we the people," which is abused usually by those who are called populists, and the issue of judiciary and struggle of Polish judiciary against the governments who, in name of the democracy, because it is easy to forget that it's exactly the democracy which is raised by people like former Prime Justice Minister Ziobro against the judges who defend their independence, claiming that they have the autonomy from the incursions of executive power. Well, of course, well, it's not so simple, but I must be simple because there is no time, and I just want to recall that this is exactly what one of the principal argument against the Polish judges was that they defend they're undemocratic, that they do not follow what the nation wants of them. Well, and this, what my wife called enigmatic community of politicians, claiming they represent the nation in person of, for instance, Minister of Justice, were limiting the freedom of self-government of the courts. But PiS said, for instance, that exactly accused the judges of many things, bad things, from stealing the sausage up to the, being the still permeated with communism in spirit and in flesh. But in the more doctrinal version, I'm looking into the program manifesto of PiS. The attack on judges, on judiciary, is that they follow the model of sovereignty of the constitution. In this model, the judges' model, the courts are at the center of the system of the Republic of Poland, and they are indeed the sovereign. The principle of the sovereignty of the people or society is rejected by the judges. Such a thesis has been formulated directly in various ways, for instance, by claiming that the constitution is the sovereign, or that it is the norms residing in the minds and hearts of judges. Well, and I wondered why so. I wondered why not to take it seriously, this argument, and to look if judges are not representative. Because they can be, if we take the definition of representation, this general definition which has been formulated by Hannah Pitkin, namely that to represent something is to represent something which literally is not present, well, then of course it is possible to prove that judges are representing the nation, even in the classical sense, Because if we look into the whole definition of nation as it is provided by in the same political manifesto of not of Peace Party, we read that nation is a commonality of culture, community of culture, language, historical experience, political tradition, and civilizational values. If this is so, well, to represent the nation is also to represent the law of the nation. The law is part of the culture. It's hard not to agree with that. We even say that to some, they even use often law to measure the culture or compare the culture, for instance, in terms of the severity of the criminal code. So this is one thing. The second thing is that, you know, anytime the Polish judge takes the oath that he will serve the Republic of Poland faithfully, to stand guard over the law, to fulfill the duties of a judge diligently, to dispense justice in accordance with provisions of the law, to impartially according to conscience, to keep a legal protected secret, and to be guided by principles of dignity and honesty in the proceedings. This oath, you know, makes the judge representing, you know, the justice system. Judges are delegated by the nation to represent the nation in the justice system. Well, so there are reasons to think, well, that the judges are representative, but in different way than, you know, members of or participants in the one of the powers, legislative power. They are elected and they represent the nation in this way. The judges are selected to represent the nation. And the conflict is not so much against, you know, representation and non-representation. Is a conflict between people representing perhaps two different values or two different, simply, they themselves are different groups, the politicians and the judges, to put it as simplest possible sociological terms. And to add something to that, well, it's important to recall this is a consequence also of the free mandate, parliamentary free mandate, which we have in Poland, like in England, thanks to Burke, let's say, Edmund Burke. Well, under free parliamentary mandate, the parliamentarian does not represent in the particular constituency. Is not bound by it. It's not instructed. The judge is not instructed. The judge represents the justice. It's in it, and he must be defended in his freedom to be servant to this value. But there is also another part of Polish constitution which says that in Article 4.2 that the sovereignty of the nation is in Poland is directly implemented directly or indirectly through representatives. So there is a possible of the mixed mode, and all this struggle between politicians who wants to control judges, not all politicians, but those from the peace side, let's say, not peaceful, but peace side. And, and the judiciary, not all, but those who defend their independence. This is not 100%. But there is also possibility of lay judges, and who are suddenly disappearing. And what happened after 1989? It was, in fact, marginalization of the very complex and developed and quite well functioning and well studied system of lay judges taking part in the administration of justice, who are considered at price of rising, the dignity of the judiciary, proper judiciary, as opposed to the lay judiciary, which fell in contempt. So the the answer, democratical answer to the so-called populist attack on Polish judges, part of the answer I see is to reinforce, also not only to defend the independence of judiciary, but also to reinforce the lay judges' direct participation of society in the administration of justice. Thank you. I have no time to present but I want to give room to other people. Sorry. Thank you very much. Cannot hear you.
To whom do the judges make their oath when they take up office? Is it to the state or to the law? Just leave that thought with you.
President.
I've lost you. There you are. Oh, you are mute. Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much, Jacek. I found that extremely interesting. As the mother of the judge, I am very concerned about these things. He gets very worried. Anyway, it's now time for feedback. My goodness me, where will you start to feedback on this rich banquet? It was a really splendid program this afternoon. Thank you all for your contributions. But my program says that Magdalena Solska, Krzysztof Motika, who I can see here, would like to give feedback. Is Barry Sullivan, who is also on the list, is he with us? Oh, good. Oh, good. Fine. Well, who would like to start? Magdalena?
Yes.
Ladies first.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here and to listen to all these presentations, which have demonstrated once again that Polish case is a truly unique in many senses. So because I haven't read the papers, so I have more questions than really comments. And I will start with the first presentation on varieties of Polish patriotism of Professor Kurczewska. Here I wanted really to stress the fact that you have used the notion of resistance, which I highly appreciate, because in political science, in my field, there's always this mix-up between resistance and opposition. And I think resistance is a very powerful concept that also stresses this moral aspect of the activity of resistance, and which this actually fits very well to solidarity movement in the 80s in Poland. I wanted to pose a question, a general question to also to the public, but also to the author who is not here, unfortunately, that whether was it perhaps inevitable that the legacy of solidarity would not survive given the unprecedented nature of the post-communist system transformation? Because post-communist system transformation in its all complexity had not only the social aspect, but also this economic aspect that has had a great impact on society. And exactly this national community, the notion of national community, the sense of it, I suppose that it probably was inevitable that during that very difficult process and unprecedented process, the legacy of solidarity would be at least weakened. And as you rightly mentioned, Professor Kurczewski, exactly this would be now the right time to maybe look back at this legacy and how this legacy could contribute to the democracy resilience in Poland. But I was simply thinking that perhaps it was really inevitable in that very difficult time to rest on the legacy of solidarity. As for the second paper, thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Jonski, and also for your brief description of the paper that you sent to me. I have several comments here because this is a very resourceful this was a very resourceful presentation. I would have been very much thankful if you could, at the very beginning, spell out your research question or what you really argue for, because it wasn't that clear to me, even though I understood at the end of the presentation that you wanted to explain why peace is still popular. Actually, it has such a loyal and reliable electorate. What I really liked is that you looked at the way constitution was made in Poland. I think this is a very crucial point, really, because also in this way, Poland is unique. The constitution making process lasted for a very long time, and actually the constitutional reality preceded the ultimate constitutional text, which is a unique situation. And given that, for instance, in the Baltic states, constitutions were enacted already in the early 90s, 91, I think, and in Hungary, not until 2011, right, the new constitution. So there is for sure a problem about the long constitution making process after communism, and Poland is a very important example thereof. Given that the party politics has been fragmented and constitution making requires actually the unity, so there were for sure many dilemmas, many interests flew into this constitution, the final constitution, etc. So I really like this that you highlighted this very fact. I don't know why you, so this is a question now, why you contrast those value systems, on the one hand democratic liberal, on the other hand religious traditional. For me also religious traditional can be democratic, so they are not, this is not a contrast. I know what you mean, but maybe there could be better or really more contrasting labels here. This is simply my perception. I know what you mean, obviously, but democratic liberal should also be like traditional voters are also democratic very frequently. They don't have to be already immediately selected or classified as not really democratic. So I don't know, maybe better labels would be more useful. I was wondering also, because one of your arguments was that these voters, traditional and religious practicing, they do want the change of the constitution, which I think it would be useful for Poland to have a new constitution. It is obviously not possible, as you mentioned, because of the political polarization in the country. But generally, it's not a bad thing to want a new constitution, especially in Poland, given how this current constitution has been written and many provisions are not that clear, to be honest. So you stress it as something negative. I wouldn't say it is so negative. And final point, I don't know if you raised it in your paper, but I would also look at the role of political polarization exactly, because this is probably one of the most influential factor when it comes to the electorates and how they behave and how they become insensitive actually towards the rule bending or role breaking of their parties. So political polarization for sure plays also a role, not only historical factors. I have one question to Professor Fushara. I've been wondering what do you think and what do you make of the fact that so many women, most women, more women than comparably to other parties, more women vote actually for peace in Poland? Not the most women, but more women than, for instance, also in the last election, than, for instance, for a civic platform or civic coalition. So what do you make of this fact? And also a question to Professor Kurczewski and the last presentation. I was also wondering, what do you think? How can the rule of law be restored or strengthened in Poland in the context of this very severe political polarization? I don't know if there is a common definition of rule of law in the panel, but I understand rule of law exactly as based on consensus. Given this polarization, it's almost impossible. So what do you think, how can it happen? Not whether it can happen, but how it could happen. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for your thoughts. If you don't mind, we will go on to our next commentator and come back to see if our speakers have any response to give to you. Barry, where have you gone? Vanished from my screen. There you are. Would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you.
I think he's mute. Can you?
I am.
No, you're right. Yeah, you're thinking. Yeah.
Given the political situation in the United States right now, I'm very happy to have been given a pseudonym to participate today. I have my name really now. I found the presentations fascinating. When I teach constitutional law, one thing that I try to focus my students on is the difficulty of implementing a constitution that's more than 200 years old. And I compare our constitution to constitutions of the first and second waves of constitutionalism during the 20th century. And so I found Dr. Jonski's presentation to be particularly interesting from that perspective of this through line that he sees between the adoption of the Constitution and the disagreements about the Constitution initially and what exists in the present. So I've found that really quite interesting. One thing that I found that I would have liked to have heard more about. I'm not an expert on Poland, although I've been going to Poland off and on for 25 years now. But one thing that I find interesting looking at the Polish situation in contrast to the US situation is really in the United States today, we have this sort of cleavage, if you will, between social and cultural values and the present administration's popularity and facilitating of social and cultural values of the silent majority, if you will, as opposed to economic policies. And one can see the current administration doing its utmost to support the cultural values of its adherents without really advancing the economic interests of the same people. So that we have, on the one hand, very conservative values with respect to things like abortion and marriage equality and so forth. And on the other side, we have crony capitalism, anti-regulatory sentiment, and so on, that really doesn't reflect the well-being of those same people. So I was curious as to whether there is this sort of disconnect in the Polish situation. And the final point I'd like to make with respect to Professor Kurczewski's presentation, which I found also very interesting. In the United States today, we have a situation in which the Supreme Court is very much aligned with the administration. The Supreme Court has taken to issuing rulings on important matters sort of with very little deliberation on a very quick basis in order to do what the administration would like it to do, and often with no explanation whatsoever. And I think that traditionally, the American ideal of the rule of law has been that the courts give explanations for their rulings and that they be the real explanations for rulings. Final thing, getting back to Professor Fushara's presentation and her discussion of the media after 1989 and the effort to control the media eventually. It's very interesting in parallel in the United States today to the extent that the administration has sought to control civil society, both governmental aspects of it, things like the Smithsonian Institution that were never considered to be part of the political realm, and things like the National Park Service. Just yesterday, there was a news item about that the current administration is engaged in purging the national parks of material that would describe the abuses of slavery and so forth, but also the efforts to bring law firms, private law firms, under the control of the administration, which seemed to me to be somewhat similar to, in theory at least, to some things that happened in Poland. So in any event, I thought that the presentations, all of them were extremely interesting, and I learned a lot and have a few questions. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Barry. We have one more commentator on our list. Christoph, would you like to present your thoughts?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation, and perhaps I would like to say something which would be relevant to all presentation very shortly. At the very beginning, perhaps some comments to, let's say, liberal constitutionalism or of Father Jerzy Popiełuszko. So I would like to add only that Blessed Father Jerzy Popiełuszko is less known as the defender of human rights from the very beginning, from the conception. In communist Poland, laws were in force which permitted abortion on demand, and Jerzy Popiełuszko opposed divine law to it, and said that, I quote, "The church's task is not only theoretical proclamation of the sanctity of life, but also the practical defense of this right." And he, on many occasions, directly supported women who were in the difficult situation. And during his work with students of the Medical Academy in Warsaw, he taught that human life begins at conception. So he was not, let's say, for strong penalization of abortion, perhaps, rather than social and state support of pregnant women. So it is no coincidence that one of the patrons of this year novena for the homeland, National Reconciliation and Respect for Human Life in March, it is Father Jerzy Popiełuszko. He's an effective advocate for this nation, including the fight for defend the unborn. One of the invocation of the litany to Blessed Father Jerzy Popiełuszko is a defender of the unborn. But it is very interesting that before the 1989 elections, Primate Glemp, in a conversation with Lech Wałęsa, emphasized on the one hand the importance of protection of the unborn, and recalled that Father Jerzy Popiełuszko considered this issue particularly important. But on the other hand, the primate emphasized that the issue of the protection of the right of the life of the unborn cannot be the subject of political games or the evaluation of candidates for members of parliaments or senators. It was a material in Gazeta Wyborcza published in 1988 on May 8. And the other issue which I would like to mention is refers to Małgosia Fuszara presentation. And what I would like to underline is that the changes in the very language which, let's say, which voices or exhibits the changes in, let's say, philosophy of rights. So before 1989, especially in the law faculties or in education, in the academia, the term human rights was not very popular one. Basically, the term civil or civic rights was in use, and only in the late 80s, the term human rights was more and more introduced to the discussion. And after fall of communism, this shift from civic rights to human rights was result of these changes in let's say, vision of rights, and the term human rights, of course, implies that these rights are not result of our citizenships or our linkage to the state, but rather results from our human nature. And that my third remarks refers to Dr. Jonski presentation. I don't remember voting my participation in the constitutional referendum. I'm not sure. Perhaps I voted against. Though I do remember not sharing the catastrophic or Cassandric fears expressed by some right-wing commentators. I believe that some of those who voted against the constitution did so not so much for substantive reasons as for, let's say, historical or emotional ones. A number of Poles, I think, myself included, probably considered it an irony of fate or an irony of history that it was the parliament with the post-communist majority that received the honor of the Constituent Assembly that adopted the new constitution. Some of them, seeing it as a kind of historical injustice, voted against it in the constitutional referendum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And can I just say one thing from the UK perspective? I'm very interested that nobody has mentioned money, because whenever judicial policy, provision, legislation, enforcement, the only strong element in any discussion is what will it cost? Can we afford access to justice? We don't have enough courts, we don't have enough judges, we can't afford any of this. And I worked as an advisor in the Ministry of Justice, and any proposal to reform anything, the first barrier it had to cross was to show that it would be value for money, which is a very crude way of developing your justice system. In Australia, they are more subtle. They talk about not VTM, value for money, they talk about SROI, which is social return on investment. And that's what determines your justice policies. So I'm very impressed that you Poles are so rich you don't have to worry about the money. Or maybe somebody would like to comment. We have just a few minutes for general questions from the floor. If anyone is holding on to an important question, you can ignore me and follow your path. Anyone wish to ask a question? Oh, they're all, you've obviously answered everybody's questions already. You've certainly presented me with some lovely new terms to use. This whole sort of mass protest, right-wing, anti-immigration, anti-immigrants, anti-Muslim, anti-anybody with a different coloured face, all this rush of emotion and activity that we're experiencing, that too gets discussed in money terms, that we can't afford to keep the immigrants out. We can't afford the border patrols to catch the little boats from France. We can't afford to feed destitute immigrants. All the time we talk about the UNCR, the Code of Human Rights, and then when it comes to it costing any money, we don't do it. But it's all about money rather than the rather more important values which you've been discussing today. So for me, it was very refreshing to hear something other than pounds, shillings and pence coming into a discussion of justice. Right, and any more questions? Nothing? You've answered everything, well done. I hope you've raised some questions that will go home and be thought about. But in the meantime, shall we turn to Reka to wrap us up?
Should we answer the questions which were asked during the
I would love you
comments?
to. I would love you to. Yes, please. Please feel free.
Yes, if I can answer, because the first commentator asked, she asked about.
Oh, you're mute, Magishata. Hey, can you?
Yeah, the first question was why women voted for peace, more women than for PO. It means for right wing, but this is not, in my opinion, this is not this way. Peace received more voters, more votes than KO, but among people, electorate of the PiS, it means right-wing group, there was more men voted for them than women. And it was opposite to vote for Civic Coalition. More women voted among the electorate of the Civic Coalition. There was more women than men. And the clear difference is between the far right, especially, versus left. Among the voters for the far right, there is less than 30% of the all electorate of far right confederation. This is women. More than 70%, this is men. And this is in a sense a reverse when we take into consideration left wing, because for the Lewica, for the left, more than 60% there are women in the electorate and less than 40% men. And the change is especially visible in the last election after this demonstration against the abortion issue. And this is very visible among the youngest generation. The problem is that among youngest generation, there is a huge gap in electorate. Generally speaking, girls are voting for left and boys are voting for far right, not only right, but far right. And this is other division, we didn't mention it before. And maybe some remark, if I may, what Barry says about the television and media, I just want to put that my notice that this is, in my opinion, very important issue, because when we are trying to find out who is controlling television, this is of course the very old way of transmitting information, very important but a very old one. And some hopes was that the social media can bring more, let's say, freedom in the principle of free expression. But now we are very worried who is, let's say, manipulating social media. And it's not only this manipulating by political party, but in Poland we have this, what they called the war in this sphere, and many of these false informations, etc., etc. And this is another issue. We should remember that our general topic was the question about democracy, about this far right-wing influence, etc. And this is, of course, the problem of the social media, which are influenced by the far right parties, far right powers. This is, in my opinion, and I think many others, this is the crucial point. Thank you.
And if I may, just one sentence on the issue that seeing the need to amend Polish constitution not being a bad thing on its own, I absolutely agree. It's not a bad thing on its own to see the need to amend the constitution. But what I'm trying to talk about is the logical sequence starting from the opposition to the constitution, through seeing the need to amendment, through supporting the attempt to pack the constitutional court, and through accepting the outcomes of this court packing. And that actually, in my view, forms some kind of narrative that pretty well describe what this group is about and what this group would prefer in terms of constitutional law. Thank you.
Hello?
Hello? Hello? Yes. Yeah.
Just one sentence to the question on how to settle the issue that divides whole society, lawyers, politicians, etc. Well, coming back to solidarity tradition, Mazowiecki's thick line, gruba kreska, that's what I think is the only way out of the crisis.
Sorry, I'm not only losing my voice, I'm losing my electronic presence as well. Thank you, Jacek. I can't answer your question. All I know is when anything is discussed in relation to our legal system, our justice system, anything else, it's what will it cost, what will it produce? It's money is the only relevant factor to most people. And that's why we have this move towards non-court dispute resolution, out-of-court resolution, mediation. Is it fair? Who cares? It's cheap. And none of you have mentioned money. I'm very interested.
Mavis, well, I have been prepared. Well, there was a slide on income of judges in Poland pointing.
Oh, right.
So please, and
sorry.
they are considered elite, and there are the only ones who have constitutionally guaranteed that what they claim. You know, the honest honorary for their jobs they do. And the piece was very proud that limited the constitutional court's judges, you know, some extra money. And well, the money plays also the element is part of the game played by ruling politicians today against the Constitutional Court and Supreme Court. Well, so there is a money. Don't worry. But there is nobody is going to really close it. Just small. That's just part of the issue.
Thank you. That's it. Right. Okay. Well, ideas. I think. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Mavis, if you want more about money, of course, we should remember that all these right-wing groups which influence social media, there is many analysis of money, how much money, what are the sources of this money, etc., etc., and why, let's say, this democratic power has not such an influence. And this is, of course, location of money is very important in that, but this is for other discussion.
I'm just interested in what is the problem on people's lips, and for us, it's always access to justice. We have no access to justice because we have not enough courts, not enough judges, not enough lawyers, and if you did have enough lawyers, people couldn't afford to ask for their services. So there is a bit of a gap between justice and the man in the street. Anyway, any more questions, or are we ready to be? I wasn't sure whether this was the kind of program where you get switched off at the time that your meeting is supposed to finish. And if anyone is nervous of that, now is the time to speak. And if not,
I think the discussion is sufficient at the moment. We can stop with the words of the Reka. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So,
just
to wrap up, on behalf of the ECPS, I would like to thank our distinguished presenters for the insightful presentations.
Thank you very much.
And I would also really like to thank Ms. Mavis Maclean for the excellent moderation and our discussants for the precise and thoughtful assessment and questions. Now, dear attendees, thank you for your participation, and we invite all of you to join our next virtual workshop in 2 weeks on the 2nd of October, where we will be exploring populism, freedom of religion, and illiberal regimes. Make sure to register and participate in this important conversation. Now, with all that, I would like to wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.